Dragon Age, the Veilguard's peak concurrent player counts bombed over 30% from its all-time peak just a week ago. And if you compare this to its kind of peers, such as Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring, this game is an absolute disaster. It is a far cry from having any kind of quote-unquote breakout success, as EA CEO Andrew Wilson tried to hype this game up to investors. I wrote this up over at fandompulse.com. If you are not a subscriber already, I highly recommend that you become a subscriber. This is where much of my writing will be happening moving forward. Obviously, this allows us to really hit home with hard-hitting writing that gets around any kind of censorship that is happening from Google and ad partners that are trying to stop people from hearing and reading the truth. So this is what is going on here. There you go. See, it wants you to subscribe. You should subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Head on over to Phantom Pulse and hit subscribe. So you can see here, the peak concurrent for Dragon Age, the Veilguard, the all-time, was 89,418. And you can see that this past Sunday, the last 24-hour peak, it was at 61,063 concurrent players. That is a decline of 31.7%. Significant decline right there. Again, pointing to the fact that this is not a game that has breakout success. And it seems that people are probably refunding this game, as we've heard from a number of insiders, and that it is not going to have a good long tail, and that sales for this game are already petering out. So let's look at some comparisons here. Baldur's Gate 3 hit an all-time peak concurrent player count of 875,343. Obviously, blowing Dragon Age the Veilguard out of the water with that peak concurrent player count back on August 13, 2023. A week later, and the peak player count had only declined to 813,288. That is only a decline of 7.09%. So it only declined 7% from its all-time peak a week after it hit its all-time peak. However, it hit its all-time peak in its second weekend. That's right. On its first Sunday, August 6, 2023, after release, it hit a peak of 814,666 players. So it saw its peak concurrent player counts actually increase by 7.4% from its first weekend to its second weekend. So where Baldur's Gate 3 saw an increase of 7.4% in its peak player counts, Dragon Age the Veilguard saw a decrease of over 30%. Over 30%. Like, absolute abysmal. So word of mouth on Dragon Age the Veilguard is absolutely terrible. Instead of seeing their peak player counts increase like we see with Baldur's Gate 3, we saw a significant decline. In fact, you can see here that in the last 24 hours, Baldur's Gate 3 had a higher peak concurrent than Dragon Age the Veilguard. It had a peak of 107,658, 76% higher than Veilguard. I mean, just absolutely destroys any kind of narrative that anyone is telling you that this game is a success or has a breakout potential. It does not. It is utterly dead. This is a failure of the game. And here's another comparison. Elden Ring. It hit a peak concurrent of 953,426 on March 5. A week after hitting its all-time peak, it still had a peak concurrent of 825,277 players. That's only a decline of 13.4%, nowhere near the 30% that we see from Dragon Age the Veilguard. However, like Baldur's Gate 3, it hit its all-time peak in its second weekend. So that 953,000 number, that was in its second weekend, because its first Saturday, February 26, 2023, it hit a peak of 861,538. That the game actually saw its peak concurrent players increase by 10.6% in its second weekend, a far cry from the 30% decline that we see with Dragon Age the Veilguard. And you can see here, this game still is hitting 45,000 peak concurrent players, and we're almost 2 years out from when this game released, just showing you that what a true breakout success is, what breakout potential actually is with Elden Ring, with Baldur's Gate 3 here, looking at just, obviously, those peak concurrent player numbers. Obviously, we know the sales are really good for those games as well. So I think it's safe to say that the rumors we're hearing from Endymion, from Smash JT, are seemingly true. All of the data points are pointing to this. We heard from Endymion that an inside source informed him that around 30,000 people had refunded the game after originally purchasing it. I think the fact that we're seeing the player numbers decline, I think that is the evidence of that. I think that does lend one to think that this is true. Then this is what Endymion said. He says, I'm also told in terms of refund that currently the game had at least 30,000 refunds in the past few days, which is not good for your game that has barely sold 500,000 copies to be hemorrhaging players like this. Similarly, Smash JT, he had another insider tell him and affirmed the rumor from Endymion. He says, on top of Veilguard's lackluster sales is the alarming rate of refunds. Endymion reported that at least 30,000 refunds had already been processed within just a few days post-launch. My source confirmed that the number is at least that many, which is an insane amount of returns for a game. So he's saying it's at least 30,000 and is likely higher. And given the fact that we're seeing 30% decline, that does seem to indicate there is some truth to that. In fact, we can also go and look at the global achievements list on Steam. Let's take a look at that right here. You can see that part one, we're looking at what around 90% people, 87.7% have completed that achievement. They've achieved the part one, the Minrathous job achievement. We go down, look at part 7. We're looking at 42.2%. Less than half of people have made it halfway through this game. 42.2%. How many people have made it to part 8? Only 28.9. People are literally stopping playing this game about halfway through. We're looking at not even 30% of people are past halfway, have gotten to part 8. When we get down to the part 14, which is the last part here, what are we looking at? We're looking at 8.3%. Not even 10% of people, not even 10% have completed the game in 2 weekends, over 2 weeks. Only 8.3%, which I think, again, lends one to believe that people were indeed refunding this game. They got part way through the game, and they're like, nah, this isn't it, and they were done. I mean, you can look part 5. We're looking at 58.6%. Part 4, 63.5%. Part 3, only 74.9%. Part 2, only 78.7%. And compare that to part 1, only 87.7. I mean, that's only like a 10 percentage point difference there between part 1 and part 2. People got a little bit through this game and completely stopped playing it. And based on what we're seeing from these rumors, they are refunding this game. So I think there's lots of evidence to show that. And I think that this game is a total failure. It is another victory for Gamergate 2.0. It is another victory for gamers. We are not playing this game. We're not spending money on this game. If we happen to spend money on this game, we realized it was an absolute mistake, and we are refunding it because we are done with this agenda. We are done with the woke lectures. We are done with the humiliation rituals. That time is over. We do not want this in our video games anymore, and we are making it very, very known through Dragon Age: The Veilguard, and then through this entire year, starting with Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, Concord, etc. Dragon Age: The Veilguard being the most recent. Star Wars Outlaws, obviously, right before it. So I am super happy that this game is absolutely failing, and failing hard, failing extraordinarily hard. But let me know what you guys make of the game's peak concurrent here, declining over 30% from its all-time peak in just 1 week. How low do you think it goes next week? Do we see it actually go even further? Do we see maybe a 60% decline? Is that how far we're going to go? How rapidly do you think this peak concurrent declines here? Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, and to always, always speak the truth.